pleasing to do that. I want to thank I did a bit of a switch, of course, left K-Pax Television, moved over to 94.9 KISS FM, and all of my colleagues at Town Square Media said, we want you to keep being involved in this. So we appreciate that. We want to thank Scott Richmond and the crew over there for being great, and Peter Christian and all my colleagues at KGVO and the other stations. And we'll be continuing that collaboration as we do this. As we get started, I do want to take just a moment to take a moment to reflect on the man whose idea this really was, because he wanted to be able to reach out to people, to be able to have this kind of dialogue, and thought that was very important. So if you join me just for a moment of silence for John Engen. I'm sure that John's spirit will continue to be with us. In fact, I could probably feel him prodding and saying, Dennis, get on with the program. So, so we'll do that. Want to introduce tonight our new Missoula Mayor, Jordan Hess, and our congratulations to him. Jordan, thanks so much for being with us today and giving us a chance in this first outing, especially to get to know you, sort of your viewpoints about some of the issues and some of the things you see Missoula facing and those kind of things. Let's talk a little bit about your background. Give us sort of that snapshot, if you will, of how you became to be involved and what brought you to Missoula.
Absolutely, and I want to thank you, Dennis, for continuing to host this. And I want to acknowledge that the fourth floor of this building, the Missoula Public Library, would not have happened but for John Engen's involvement. And I think as we look out over the community with the beautiful views from here, and Mayor Engen's fingerprints are all over this community and will be for decades to come. So I was born in Dickinson, North Dakota. I had my parents grew up in Montana and moved to North Dakota to open a Taco John's restaurant.
Really?
And worked away around the clock making tacos in two restaurants for about 17 years, and they just grew tired of that, and we relocated to Helena. I spent most of my childhood in Helena. And came over to Missoula to attend the University of Montana, and I studied geography, and I had an emphasis in community and environmental planning and in cartography and GIS. I really got interested in local government in that time during the first downtown master plan. I was in a planning class, and I was at a planning charrette for that downtown master plan, and I found the subject matter and the idea of really planning what kind of community we want to have to just be an incredibly engaging, important line of discussion. So I went all in on that wanting to be involved in public service.
That must have been interesting with your interest in geography, when you look at the geography of this valley and the fact there is finite space, there's certain corridors you've got to honor, so there must have been that, you made that connection. Right?
Yeah, and I've always been interested in maps and transportation and kind of geography adjacent fields, and that downtown master plan really kind of solidified that interest for me. So I, fast forward a few years, I went to work at the University of Montana as a web developer at the Mansfield Library. I was there for a few years and kind of had like one foot in the IT realm and one foot in sort of the marketing and communications and branding world, and loved working on campus, found it to be a really compelling, fun, rewarding environment. It's great to be around all the energy on campus.
That energy on campus is amazing,
And so I worked there for a few years and then transitioned into being the transportation director at the University of Montana. So we ran the U- bus service and all of the campus access programs, bike ped programs, that sort of thing. And on the same day that I started that job, I was sworn in to serve on the Missoula City Council. I was elected in 2013, and so January 6th, 2014 was a busy day, and a busy 8 or 9 years after that of doing both of those. This summer, I decided it was time for a change and left the university, and had a few months of relative quiet, and then was fortunate to step in as mayor just 2 weeks ago today.
Let's get back to that experience at UM in particular, because that's where we first really got to know each other with running UDash and those kind of things. And I remember there was one thing that always impressed me about you was your viewpoint of this future aspect of things. It was like you had this perception of, well, okay, we have this system, and I'm thinking in particular the switch to electric buses, which at the time, I don't know if you were the only one, but certainly one of the first to embrace the use of electric. Talk a little bit about what was the interest in that sort of a transition.
Yeah, it's one of those projects where you could meet so many objectives at once. So the University of Montana was the first university in the country to, not the first one to get electric buses outright, but the first one to have modern, fast charging, kind of not science project electric buses.
Yes.
And when we bought those, it was, obviously the interest was immediately from a sustainability and an air quality standpoint, and we had grown really quickly, and we had purchased used diesel buses that they were loud, they didn't meet current emission controls, and they really, they transported students and they did that well, but they had a community impact beyond that, and it felt like it was an important time to explore what was possible. As we looked into the electric buses, we really found that they were cost competitive, and there was a strong business case to be made for transitioning to electric vehicles and away from the older diesel vehicles. Those buses have been in service for several years now, and Mountain Line has followed suit with their own electric vehicle program, and I think it really is, especially for kind of that large fleet vehicle, I think it really is kind of the future.
I've certainly noticed the difference when you're on campus. Just in terms of the noise, if you're waiting outside Adams Center or something like that, there was always, the big bus coming by and those kind of things. It just has really changed the character. So there's that environmental piece and the business piece, but also just the aesthetics, right?
Well, and there's also, the campus is a finite space. It's got, it's landlocked. It's surrounded by a river and a mountain and a historic residential neighborhood, and there really isn't room to add additional parking. And stacking parking on top of parking is incredibly expensive. And so what we really looked at was how do we get people to campus in a way that is cost effective, that meets our goals from a climate and sustainability standpoint, and it was it's cheaper to provide alternatives. It's cheaper to provide bus transportation. It's cheaper to provide good quality bike ped infrastructure, and there's really a business case to be made for it. And I think looking at our community, our development pattern is the same way, where we have the opportunity to develop a diversity of housing types you look at like the University District neighborhood, and it is this wonderful, vibrant, compact neighborhood. It's also one of the more dense neighborhoods in town, and you would never know
People don't really realize that. Yeah, exactly.
But it was built in this way that really was efficient and really was livable, and so I think that same lesson can be applied as we look to growth and development within the community.
One thing that I noticed in the subsequent part when you were still at UM was that you always had that sense of what was happening on campus, whether it's transportation or those kinds of things. And I remember you showing up at different hearings and different things, and the transportation planning organization, those kinds of things, and you're always an advocate for that. But did the lessons that you learn in that campus situation start you thinking a little bit about how some of that could go out and be used in other parts of the city to benefit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that is most helpful right now is just the experience. The university is a large public sector organization, and there are lots of different parts, and making sure that the right hand talks to the left, and making sure that there's collaboration and communication, and that stakeholders with diverse interests are heard, and I think that's the thing that's most transferable to the city right now, is that the city really is a similarly large, diverse organization. There's not a lot in common between wastewater and municipal court, but they're part of the same organization, and having that kind of 30,000-foot view of the organization is probably the biggest thing I brought with me from UM.
Have you been encouraged? I think of every community goes through a period where there's a little bit of tension among different organizations, whether they're competing for dollars or attention or personalities get involved. It seems like there has been we've entered an era of collaboration. Some of that, I think, different people have said was largely because of John Engen, because he had that sort of feeling. How do you see that, and what are the benefits of where we are now in terms of, say, the relationships with, the city and UM, or the city and the county, and those things?
Well, Commissioner Josh Slotnick, County Commissioner Slotnick, has this saying that he likes to say that we're in this golden age of local government, and I think that there's a lot of truth to that, and a lot of that comes from the collaboration. So on the Operation Shelter programs, our homelessness programs, there's good collaboration between city and county and private service providers, we see that across all sorts of sectors. President Bodner, I think, is a great collaborator as well, and has I think the university and the city in these types of roles can really be a convener that can pull the parties together and make sure we might not have the solution, but we can make sure that we get a bunch of smart people in the room and figure out what the solution is.
We're talking with Mayor Jordan Hess, new Missoula mayor, appointed. Have you been in a month yet?
2 weeks ago today.
2 weeks ago today. I was going to say, I see you pretty close. So you'll be marking those times as we go along. Let's talk a little bit about the actual aspect of moving into the city, and let's talk about your council experience briefly. We'll get to some questions in a moment, but when that experience on council, what's that been like to work with 12 different personalities, people coming and going, trying to reach objectives?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, council is not monolithic. It is 12 individuals with diverse opinions and diverse backgrounds and different perspectives, and that's important. I mean, it's really important to have this diversity of opinion. Councilman Nugent and Council President Jones are here tonight, and I think they would agree that there's really value in having people with different professional backgrounds, having people with different economic backgrounds, different lived experiences. I've been on councils where every vote is 12-0, and I don't think that they're as strong as the council we have now. The council we have now has good discussions and a diversity of opinions, and that makes our decisions stronger. It makes the city council's decisions stronger to have someone who disagrees, and it really it causes you to really think and refine your decision and make sure that you're on solid ground, and so I think it's a great. My experience was fantastic. It was a really collaborative body. One of the things that I loved about the council was just the number of things that you learn about absolutely everything.
Everything, yeah, exactly. That's the same thing with me as a reporter. It's like, I didn't know that even happened. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we run a compost facility, and we grow, we directly discharge treated wastewater into to irrigate poplar trees, and that prevents about 1 million gallons a day of treated effluent from entering the Clark Fork River. And it's this biological system that works really well, and the potential next step is that these trees will be used for feedstock for the compost operation, and then we can maybe use that to grow, to apply on city parks or to sell to remediation efforts. And that one area that happens all over the city, and it's so cool to see just how much thought and dedication and innovation goes into all of these different programs around the city.
How has it changed, or maybe it's too soon to know, from setting on one of the side seats, from setting that center seat? What are you going to try to do to sort of reflect that change in your responsibilities and, as necessary, relationship with the council?
Yeah. Well, I think so. The council is the members of council are my friends and colleagues, and that doesn't change. And I think we have a good working relationship. We have had a good relationship on council, and I'm transitioning into understanding sort of what how the mayor officially interacts with the council. And I think because we have such good collaborative players on the council, I think it's a transition that is going to go relatively smoothly. In terms of the charter, of course, the city charter spells out
really, people don't realize that charter really illustrates that relationship.
Yeah, and I think you can think of it as it's sort of the city's version of a constitution. Just like any other, just like most other branches of government or levels of government in the U.S., we've got 3 branches. So we've got an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch, and they all have clearly defined roles, whether it's in state statute or whether it's in the city charter, and so I think respecting those roles and staying in my lane is something that's going to be important to me, and also relying on council. Council sets the policy, and so if I have a policy proposal, I'll take it through the council process, and and so that'll be an adjustment to transition into doing that way versus proposing things to the mayor or receiving things from the mayor as a council member and as a council or as a policy proposal.
Yeah.
So.
One advantage, though, you do have, not an advantage over council necessarily, but an advantage in the seat is that you do have some very experienced people for department heads to help drive that. And talk a little bit about that relationship, not just with yourself, but with the council. How do you feel about that the resource that we have with those people?
Yeah. So we have a really good, we call them our senior leadership team, but it's essentially our department heads and a few other folks. And that is a really collaborative management team. So we have, again, department heads with a diverse portfolio of responsibilities, and we have a variety of management structures. So we have our senior leadership team, which really makes sure that the day-to-day work of the city is aligned with the strategic goals of the city. We have a strategic plan that the city council adopted or that the city council created in consultation with the mayor and with Mayor Engen and with those department heads. And the strategic leadership team is really the shepherd of that strategic plan.
They're the ones that implement it, make sure it's kind of on track, or we're meeting those goals.
Yeah.
Right?
It's also a place where department heads can bring concerns from their departments for brainstorming or for problem solving. And then we also have a couple of other. We have a management team, which is a larger group, and that includes a lot of deputy directors and a lot of folks in management roles. And that's another great opportunity to disseminate information, within the organization, but also to gather feedback from within the organization. There's a big focus of mine is on internal communication right now, and really making sure that we're communicating internally in a way that meets everyone's needs, and is that we're sending timely communications at the right moment about the right stuff, and
I would think that's doubly important now too, because of the disruption we've seen over the past year. I see this in all the workplaces I've observed, not just government, of getting used to the fact that the pandemic is sort of kind of over. How do we proceed from here? And then, of course, doubly for the city to have lost the mayor, all that type of transition. So communication I would think, be really important in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, the one thing that I'll say is that the city staff are phenomenal. They're bought in on our strategic priorities, and they go to work and work hard on in their areas. And I have felt so supported and so welcomed by the city staff. And I can't imagine stepping into this role without, if the staff weren't so collaborative and so dedicated, I can't imagine. It would be a totally different experience.
We'll get to some questions in just a minute. I do want to mention our phone number is still 552-60. I always do this. That's a hard one to do. 552-6002. So 552-6002. So if you're watching and you have a question, something you want to pass along to the mayor, give that number a call, and then they'll relay them into us. Just before we start from questions from the audience, Jordan, I want to talk a little bit about 2 or 3 or 4 of the things that you see, and in no particular order. But let's talk a lot. One of the things on everybody's mind right now, I think, especially with the fluctuations in market and everything, is the dynamics of our housing situation. Give us sort of a thumbnail of how you see that and the importance of that.
Absolutely. So we are embarking on a comprehensive update to our land use code. This started this summer, and it's really getting going in earnest right now. This is a consultant-driven process that's really funded through the pandemic relief money. So it truly is a once in a generation opportunity. Our zoning code was originally adopted in the 1930s, and it's been updated and it's been added on to, and there's been major revisions to it, but it's still kind of the basic pyramidal zoning structure that cities around the country were adopting in the 1930s. And because of the fact that it's been cobbled together and added on to, everyone has a junk drawer in their garage, and when
or
you
several.
or several, yeah.
Sometimes, yes.
And you go to the junk drawer, and there's a good chance that what you need is in there, but you rummage around and maybe you get cut in the process, and it's inefficient. And I think our code is like that junk drawer, where we have an opportunity to really streamline it, to really clean it up, to really make sure that it is working for everyone. And so that code reform is on the regulatory side, and that is an opportunity to clean up our code and how we develop from a regulatory side.
Is there a horizon line that we're trying to look at with that at all? Thank you, Jay. Keeps us going.
So it's
10, 20 years, 50 years, or is there a number attached to that, or is it pretty open-ended?
Well, so I think the life cycle of the code is open-ended. The process that we're looking at is about a 2.5-year process. We're simultaneously organizing the junk drawer, and we're putting everything where it needs to be, and then we're also evaluating the tools. So we're innovating around the code, and so we're looking to the rest of the country for best practices. What do we want to do here that we're not currently doing? And so those are kind of two tracks that'll intersect along the process. Another thing that we're doing is looking at interim solutions. We have some things in the code that we absolutely know need to be changed. We're looking at doing some interim changes, kind of more or less immediately, within the next several months, to roll out changes that are just kind of common sense, non-controversial changes. And so that regulatory side comes along with some process evaluation. So we'll look at, if you go in to get a building permit, what are the steps in the process, and where are the areas where there's headaches? What are the pain points in that process? So this process audit will look at ways that we can hopefully clean up that process and streamline it.
Because I know we've heard from both the realty community, the realtors, and also the building community, and oftentimes it's said that that's one of the problems, not just in Missoula, but generally, that we're not moving quickly enough to expand housing or retrofit, whatever it is. The action is getting slowed by that paperwork.
Yeah, and I think that part of it is volume. So there's so much work coming through. Part of it is process. Part of it is regulation. So we have regulations that are clunky, and the staff. It takes more staff time to implement them. So I think all of those together will help streamline that and hopefully get more permits out the door. And but it's not every house everywhere every time. It's we still have standards of quality, and so we will have we'll maintain standards of quality, but we'll streamline the process at the same time. The last piece, I think, is really direct participation in our housing market. So we have our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is a new tool that was created a couple years ago now, and that's a way to directly invest in creating housing that Missoulians can afford. And there's some criteria for how that money goes out the door. We also have our city land banking strategy. So we have city-owned land that we're able to deploy for redevelopment. And there's exciting examples of that on the north side, off of Scott Street. The Sleepy Inn site, which we purchased as a non-congregate shelter during the coronavirus pandemic. That ultimately will get redeveloped, and that'll utilize that same strategy where it's taking city-owned land and really putting it out for public benefit.
While still maintaining enough in the land bank for whatever those future needs are, right? Exactly.
Absolutely.
Another thing too, and this gets back to our earlier conversation, is sort of the traffic and growth and those things going on, and I know a lot of that is driven in large part by economic development. Tell me a little bit about that aspect of things, and where do you see that fitting in some of your priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so as far as the physical infrastructure, traffic, transportation, circulation aspect of it, I think our growth and development patterns really have a lot to do with our ability to build and maintain infrastructure. And if we're building large lot suburban infrastructure or suburban developments, we don't have a mechanism. The tax base just does not cover the maintaining that infrastructure over the long haul. Some of our infill projects, some of our strategies on focusing inward, really create tax base where it's needed and get us much closer to a sustainable tax situation. So I think that's a big part of it from a development pattern standpoint. In terms of just economic opportunity and economic development more broadly, I think the city, in my opinion, is in the business. We're a service provider, and the service that we provide is community building. I mean, we are building a safe, livable, vibrant community. That is the work that we do day in and day out, and it's work that matters, and it's work that shapes what our community looks like. But another part of that responsibility lies in our private sector, and so from an economic development standpoint, we are trying to foster businesses where employees are happy and fulfilled and well paid and can afford to live here.
Affordability is huge on that side.
And so I think there's a really important nexus between the growth and development and all the stuff that the city's doing, and then all of the things that we're trying to foster in the private sector. Our friends at the Missoula Economic Partnership are key partners in that, and we have Nicole Rush from MEP here, and I think we could take questions for Nicole later.
Good.
But it goes. I mean, they go hand in glove.
Mm-hmm. And that gets to kind of one of the final points I want to make, and then we'll open up for questions, is what do you see as this future? If you could sort of, shake the magic 8-ball or whatever you want to do and have things in a certain way in 10 years, what would you like to see for Missoula?
I think one of the biggest things is that we have a community where everyone has a chance. Everyone has an opportunity to succeed. Everyone has an opportunity to have their physical and emotional and mental and spiritual needs fulfilled, that everyone has the chance to live a happy, productive life. And that really is what makes a community. And so that's how we measure our success. And that's kind of lofty, but that's how we know that we've been doing the right thing. I think that one of the things that I am really excited about from an economic development standpoint is that the Missoula Economic Partnership, our economic development partner in the community, has adopted they just completed a comprehensive, I'm going to get the acronym wrong, but it's a comprehensive economic development study for the area. And their vision statement talks about that same thing, that the community provides, that the economic development in the community provides opportunity for everyone, and I think it's part of who we are as Missoulians. It's part of the community, building the community that we want to live in.
And I would imagine, knowing how you've approached things too, getting public involvement in that type of thing is also key too, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Early on. All right, great. Well, let's go ahead and open it up for questions. We have a nice audience here tonight, and Jordan, maybe you want to introduce a couple other people that we have in the group here.
Yeah,
came
absolutely.
In to help out if we have other questions, so people know who's here.
Absolutely. So we have from the City Council, we have Gwen Jones and Mike Nugent. We have from the Missoula Economic Partnership, we have Nicole Rush. And then from the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, we have Macy McPherson and Annette Marchessault.
Good. All right, well, we have them here for questions too, or if they want to clarify a point, we can include them in the conversation. So we'll just start out. Is there any questions from audience here that we have? Yeah. Let me come over your direction here. Grab the other microphone. Go ahead and stand up and introduce yourself. I'll hang on to that.
Hello, Larry Chase, and a new resident as of 9 months ago here.
Congratulations, welcome to Missoula.
Oh, thank you. We're loving it, for sure. We chose it on purpose, and we're loving it. Jordan, I'm curious, you're new to the role, and I'm curious what your definition and what humility means to you, and how does that show up in the way that you lead?
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Larry. That's a great question.
That's a great question, Larry. I think, I love that question. I think humility is an incredibly important trait in a leader. don't come very naturally to sitting in front of a crowd, and I'm growing into that. But I think it has there's an integrity piece. There's an honesty piece. It's showing up and working hard and doing what you say you're going to do, and being accountable, and admitting when you're wrong, and leaning on others, asking for help. I think it's the best thing I could do at the city is facilitate the good work that other people are doing. I think that's I think the role of the mayor, in my opinion, is recognizing talent in others and facilitating them doing good work and doing right by their community.
That's a great question, Larry. Thanks very much. Anybody else with a question at this point? Okay, I'm going to shift gears and talk about something I want to make sure we cover tonight, because I think it's really interesting. I'm going to switch back to this mic, guys. Is the Midtown planning, and the reason I want to bring up the Midtown plan, because you talk about how we use the valley, basically, for want of a better phrase. And I think of Midtown, and you look at historic pictures, and it was not that many years ago that Midtown was really on the outskirts. It really was. I can remember my first association with Missoula. It's been almost 50 years ago, coming here as a young man with my father who's doing some business. And everybody was like, oh, the 93 Strip, and we have Kmart halfway to Hamilton, and how big can this place get? And I think about how it's all infill. The mall is there now. We've had improvements at the fairgrounds, and there's more to come. Tell me a little bit about how you see the Midtown plan as an example of how do we go back and take a space that's very familiar to us and make it usable, livable, all those aspirations that you had, that you talked about.
I think one of our greatest assets, and also one of our greatest challenges, is that we are so geographically hemmed in. I mean, we're a pretty small valley, and you look at Bozeman, and Bozeman can grow all the way to Three Forks, and
to their detriment.
Yeah,
yes.
And we don't have that opportunity. Midtown is an area that you can recognize if you are ever flying in and out of Missoula. You can recognize it if you hike the M. It is an area that really developed in post World War II. Really developed in a particular pattern. It's also an area with a strong. It's a diverse area with a lot of different types of businesses.
There's a lot going on there.
A lot of local businesses.
Residents, everything, yeah.
And and residents, we have a lot of seniors, we have a lot of renters, we have a lot of working families. It's an area with a lot of pride, an area with a lot going for it. And I think the downtown master plan that I talked about at the beginning of the program, I think master plans and master planning is important, and it helps us plant a flag about what kind of community we want to be. And these district plans, these district level plans really help us create that pride and create the goals for what we want to be. So Midtown, I think, there's a strong foundation with all these businesses, and
there's been a lot of growth. People, if you don't work in that part of town, you don't realize the amount of redevelopment that's taken place. Some fairly significant office buildings, places from Russell over by the fairgrounds. That whole area. There's a lot that's been happening.
Well, and if we could go to Nicole, I think there's the Onyx Maps is a great example of a success story that.
Let me go ahead and walk. I'm going to walk in front of the camera. I'm not supposed to do that, but yeah, Nicole, tell us a little bit about that too, about that aspect of that redevelopment we've seen in Midtown. I'll hang on to it, that way you don't have to worry about it.
Sure, yeah, we've seen a lot of investment and growth in Midtown. It's from the businesses out there, they really value being there for a variety of reasons. One is that it's one of the more affordable places to start a business in Missoula and run a business. You can find a cheaper location, whether you're a retail storefront or an office or any other kind of business out in Midtown. So it's great for that. Even though there are some transportation gridlock issues in Midtown, it's very convenient for a lot of neighborhoods, as well as being a residential neighborhood in its own right. So there's a lot going for Midtown, and the businesses that we see growing there, Onyx Maps is a great example. That's a Montana entrepreneurship success story founded right here in Missoula. One of the more exciting companies operating in Montana today. They have 2 buildings out in Midtown now, and they continue to grow. We've seen a lot of downtown businesses open second locations in Midtown, so the Big Dipper, the Dram Shop, the Trailhead River Sports, the notorious PIG, Bridge Pizza, all operating new.
I think
new
of
locations out there.
the Tremper family and the investment they made in a landmark place that had been there for decades and decades, reconfiguring, thinking of how do we use this space. That's a kind of an example there too.
Yeah, that's a great example, and that's such a nice mixed use area with all the brewery and everything out there. So so we really see a lot of potential for growth in Midtown for sure.
Great. Good. Thank you very much. That's good. It is interesting, isn't it, Jordan, to see how this develops over time. And she talked about something that's interesting, and having spent most of my time at Missoula working in Midtown, the access to parking, the access to available, flexible space. That's pretty important too for economic development, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think one thing that is really exciting to me is the Missoula Redevelopment Agency and Mountain Line received a federal grant, and it's essentially a planning grant, but it's to look further at the Brook Street corridor. One of the biggest problems with Brook Street is that it's not permeable. It's impossible to cross it as at an uncontrolled intersection in a vehicle, or at a stop controlled intersection in a vehicle, but also as a bicyclist, as a pedestrian, as a person in a wheelchair, as a transit rider, and one of the things that we can do through this planning process is make Brook Street work better for all users, and that creates opportunities for if you can cross the street, then there's actually an example of there's a business in Midtown that has a lot of employees, and across Brook Street, and they don't have enough parking. And across Brook Street, there is another business that has a surplus of parking, and they are talking about a lease situation. Can we lease some of your parking lot? And it's just untenable for them to lease a parking lot where dozens of employees are going to have to be walking across Brook Street every day. So if we can connect opportunities like that, I mean, it makes for more efficient land use if you can have shared use parking or shared that sort of arrangement.
I know at KPAX TV that was always a challenge. And our older team that was there, it was like we would go across to Ruby's and have a department head meeting, and it was always an adventure to cross that street. It really was. And Brooks is interesting too because it's an example of that cyclical street, because it's such a feeder to all the growth that we have south of Missoula. You get a lot of traffic coming in the morning and a lot leaving town at the same time. So some ideas to try to work around and make it as multi-use as possible.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What's the timing and update on that? I mean, I haven't followed that as closely in recent months, but it's that planning process is moving right along, isn't it?
Could we ask Annette to
Sure.
come to?
Yeah. Annette, we'll face this camera here. So
Sure.
Talk about the timing of this Midtown planning effort.
Sure. Well, there are right now. The Midtown Association is undertaking a master plan for Midtown, and that, I believe, kicked off in June of this year, doing background and field work. They are just last night had a community input session. Almost 200 people showed up. Really robustly attended, and so the consultants are taking that information and going back and kind of digesting it, and they'll probably come back in a couple months with some drawings on paper and have another. They expect to finish that master planning process, I think, by next summer, so the summer of 2023.
How does that interleave then with the Brooks corridor piece that's going on there?
Yep. So that's the second planning effort. So the Brooks Corridor Transportation Plan, the city, a whole coalition of folks, the city, the county, Montana Department of Transportation, because Brooks Street is part of, it's a state route. So a coalition of folks since 2015 or even before then, a group called the Midtown Mojo has been meeting, looking for what do we do with Brook Street, and as the mayor said, to get that permeability across Brook Street, and I don't know that. I shouldn't say solution, but the strategy is to really focus on transit-oriented development. So get a robust transit system on Brook Street. And so a series of studies and the concept that is being explored right now is a bus route that would be in the center of the street. And that's pretty exciting because by putting bus stops in the middle of Brook Street, we have a center lane as it is today. Put a bus there, put the bus stops in the center of the street, then you have this pedestrian refuge. You can get halfway across, refuge, halfway across.
Right.
So it starts to get at that permeability. And then also to make transit successful, you need these alternative options for transportation.
I know
So
that has been a problem for Mountain Line. I know I've talked to them in the past. Brooks gets so busy that just to partly get off by Montana Club and catch a couple of people, and it fouls, everything backs up. And yeah, so a new approach is what's being discussed.
it's a new approach and an approach that looks at, certainly the bus is the transit is sort of the driver, but you need robust pedestrian access, bicycle access. You need a critical mass of people living in proximity, businesses. So it's a multi-pronged project. And the concept came about in a study that was completed in 2020. As the mayor mentioned, we got a federal grant to take that sort of to the finish line, and that should be getting started. We hope to issue the RFP sometime this fall and getting started after the first of the year.
Great, thank you, Ann. Appreciate it very much. Mayor, I have to ask, the question that everybody's going to have on their minds is there room to put all that in the Brooks corridor?
Well,
You know,
I mean, it's a really important question.
It's a challenge, but
And I think there's going to be some prioritization for sure. So there's a fairly narrow right of way, and we'll have to have honest conversations about whether or not we can acquire right of way in certain areas, and that will be a discussion that we need to have in a very public venue. I mean, there's obviously property owners that have a strong interest in that, and so that's a conversation that will happen very publicly and very, very transparently.
I would imagine, let me interrupt you on that though, but I would imagine too that we're at a point in the evolution of Midtown where the solutions, if you're moving in especially unique areas, it's better to do it now than 10 years from now or something like that when you've had already more redevelopment.
You look at Russell Street, and that was a good example of the first phase of Russell Street from the river to 3rd Street, or to not quite to 3rd, but almost. That was a good example of a process that was a public process, and there's federal NEPA and different. There's a lot that goes into these projects, and so it will be a process. It'll be a collaborative planning process, and if there are right-of-way needs, that'll be certainly part of that planning process. I think another thing, like I said, is prioritization, and maybe you get right-of-way in south of Paxson. There's all the right-of-way in the world. It's a wide street, and this concept actually helps with safety because it sort of creates some opportunities, like Annette said, for pedestrian refuge, and you can fit pretty much all those priorities in that area. When you get north of Paxson, I think it's a case of prioritization and of maybe you can selectively get right of way for a station in this area. I would say it's something that we need to know, though, if we want to look at redeveloping Brooks in any way. What are the needs there?
I was having a conversation online with some of my social media followers too, and there was some interest. They said, well, we're kind of waiting for other developments. We got sidewalks that have issues, pavement issues, a lot of that's DOT issues, but some of that is waiting too. People want to know, well, when is this going to get fixed or that fixed? A lot of it needs to be ironed out, and then that you do that and spend that money. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that's exciting about this, the study, the federally funded study, is the opportunity to really dig in on what's the feasibility and what are the challenges and what would it take to improve this roadway. And like I said at the outset, the Brook Street doesn't work very well for anyone right now, and so how do we make it work better for everyone?
Great. We're talking with Mayor Jordan Hess, and kind of get acquainted session here as we resume Wednesdays with the mayor. I'm Dennis Bragg. Thanks to being here. I want to thank all the staff, and I was remiss. I need to give credit to Joel Barrett and his team, Scott and Ron, running all the cameras and trying to keep up with me as I move around the room. So I've only been off television for 3 weeks, and I'd forgotten how to use cameras already. So. And I want to thank my employers too at Town Square Media and KISS 94.9 and also KGVO for allowing us to be a part of this. And I think it's fun to have this kind of dialogue. You mentioned funding, and let me touch on the money, because that's always a big thing. Everybody right now, jurisdictions all across the country, and I'm amazed already some of the proposals I'm seeing, how is that infrastructure, are all going, oh, there's this huge pile of money and things. How much can we really depend on getting, whether it's the infrastructure funding federally or other pots of money out there? I know DOT struggles to find it. For the bridges, took forever because of it. How confident are you about being able to find the kind of funding, whether it's for Midtown or other infrastructure?
So we have a team in our transportation division of Public Works and Mobility that is really, Aaron Wilson is the lead of that team, and they're really looking out for grants. So they submitted a grant application for some improvements to South Avenue near Fort Missoula Regional Park. They've also looked at grants for doing improvements to Highway 200 on out through East Missoula. So there actually are a lot of different pots of federal money that came out of the bipartisan infrastructure law that Senator Tester was instrumental in authoring and passing. I think the biggest challenge we're going to have in Montana is we don't have, at the state level, we really don't have adequate dedicated funding for local government infrastructure. And so one of the things I hope the state would look at with the state's got a nearly $2 billion budget surplus right now, and cities and towns around the state are digging for coins in the couch cushions to pay for these infrastructure projects. And I think that creating a statewide source for matching funds for these federal grants, these federal grants require typically 13.42, I think is a common number, percentage match, but let's say 10 to 20% local match required. So a 10% match on a $20 million project is real money. And so I think that's something that the state could really participate in, is creating a matching fund source so that communities could apply for matching funds to build these projects at the local level.
Want to check again with our audience. Any questions? Don't want to overlook questions as we go.
I know it's not fair, Dennis. I want to ask a question.
Okay. Can we get Joel on? We got to at least have him on the sound here.
That's
so.
right. No, I'll come over here to ask Mayor Hess my question. And that is, we were talking about the city and the county working very well together. I'm really interested in progress on attaining the federal building where the downtown post office is now. I saw something in the newspaper that suggested there was movement on that front, but I wondered if you could touch on that project, the overall costs or a timeline or something of that nature, because they're such wonderful buildings, and the notion that the city and the county would be housed under one roof and perhaps have the opportunity to work ever the more closely is a very exciting prospect for the future.
Yeah, great question, Joel. Yeah, what
thanks,
about
Joel.
that? Because I know that's one of those, we were doing it to some level before COVID, and what's going on now?
Yeah.
So update us.
So this week the council had a public hearing on creating a special district, and this is just a legal device. Basically, the only two members of the special district would be the city and the county, and it would the federal government will only transfer ownership of the building to a single entity. So this is sort of a legal, essentially a legal entity that could own the building. The federal program for these federal assets, they're all owned and managed by the federal GSA, General Services Administration, and GSA, again, actually with great support from Senator Tester, has put this building into a program that's it's not called the Good Neighbor program, but it's something along those lines. But but it's essentially a program that will transfer historic assets to local governments in exchange for the local government agreeing to maintain that asset. So the building will be free to receive. It obviously won't be free to move into and operate. It has some challenges that need to be addressed. But the federal government takes pretty good care of their assets like this. So there's been a lot of work on historic preservation. There's been a lot of upgrades to the building. There's been a lot of, the building's been well maintained. We've had an architecture team that has gone in and done some assessments, and our understanding, we don't have full cost estimates yet, and we do have escape hatches here. So if this is not feasible, we can terminate the project. But at this point, we should be on track to receive the building sometime in the next calendar year. The FBI are still in that building, and so there's a few. There might be another small federal Fish and Wildlife Service might be in there now too. But there's an effort to once those agencies move out of that building, we should be able to take ownership of that building fairly shortly thereafter.
To get to Joel's question too, it does because look. The county has needed space. They filled the annex. They're moved across. They're using. They're here. They're there. Everything else. The city's almost in the same kind of thing. We're using a city hall that was built years ago. Yeah. We've expanded into some other spaces. Is there thinking that this could be a joint city-county building, or is that a little bit of a grand estimation when we're still trying to figure it out?
No, that's the plan. That's the plan right now for both city and county, is that the building would be jointly operated. The city hall was built in I'm not sure the year, the early 60s, I think 61 maybe, and they didn't build buildings in 1961 like they did in 1920, and the federal building it's got good bones, and it'll. Our understanding is that it'll last as long as we take care of it. It's kind of could be a good forever home for city government, and the county too. One of the things that's great about this process also is that there's opportunity for joint planning and joint just things like the customer service reception. So a constituent walks in and maybe they need to renew their vehicle registration, which is a county function, or maybe they need to pay their water bill, which is a city function. The city and the county both have the same name here, which is part of the confusion perhaps, but also. You walk into a local government building and you could get service for either local government entity. I envision there being almost like a reception or almost a concierge in the building, that when you walk in and they get you to where you need to go as far as the service that you need. So there's opportunities in how we design the improvements to that building to really make sure that the residents are able to interact with local government in a way that is efficient and productive and pleasant. And I've got this theory that people don't like local government, because they have to renew their driver's license.
It's probably one of the number one rubbing points is driver's license or your vehicle license or something like that. It's tough. And
there's a lot more to it than that. But I think as government, we can be better providers of customer service. We can provide an experience where you come in for something that you have to do and don't want to do, but we can make that experience quick. We can make it seamless. We can make it friendly, and I think the city does a great job on a lot of those aspects. But having a space that's purpose built for resident interactions, I think will go a long way to furthering our goals around customer service.
I have to ask this: there's one thing about that building I've always thought that's interesting, because I know even at the federal courthouse, parking gets to be real interesting, and we've actually lost some parking for a good reason. Business development. Is the parking question, and then bordered by residential on the north side, is the parking question part of this assessment that you look at? How do you handle that parking impact over there?
Yeah, it is. At this time we really don't provide parking for city employees. There's city employees can lease parking. There's some adjacent to City Hall, but there's nowhere near enough for all the employees. We also same with the county. The county has a small portion of the parking lot next to their administrative building that's available to county employees, but again, nowhere near the number of folks that are working in that building. And the federal building, when the Forest Service was there, had about, I think it was about 400 employees working out of that building without dedicated parking. So it's part, I think it's going back to that campus example where the downtown is a parking and transportation ecosystem that needs to be managed holistically. And so working with the Parking Commission, working with the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, if there's a need to develop parking more proximate to the federal building, that would be the process. But I think just going back on the fact that it worked for so long for the federal building, and we don't currently provide parking for city staff, I think it'll all
That's a good point. I'd
work
forgotten
out.
about that with that many employees in there and everything. So I want to make sure we get our number out one more time. 552-6002, 552-6002. Last call for any questions out there. And I will say one thing. We got one more question in the audience. Also, the thing is, we will be doing more programs, so that'll give us a chance to dive into more things specifically. So, got a question back here, guys. So I'm going to get up and move. I don't know how Phil Donahue did this after all these years. I really don't sometimes. So, all right, let's. I think we're looking at this camera. Can you give me your name?
My name is Bob Moore.
Okay, Bob. What's your question?
I got a bad cold, so I'm
That's
not
okay.
speaking too well. My question is, we've had a lot of discussions tonight about parking, things like parking, and somebody's got to walk across the street. It's inconvenient. Several years ago, I tried my best to get the city to hire more policemen. Went to several meetings. Hire more policemen. They finally did. I don't know how many they hired, but I've been told they did. I wonder if you should be, or are you going to do an emphasis on the crime and the driving and speeding in this town? Today's paper of the Missoulian, I don't know the time frame of this. I've been trying to get the city to say what is this. But in today's paper, 4 violent offenders in today's paper. 5 sex offenders. Reminds me of the book, famous book. And 8 people, I don't know what they just say, Justice Department, Justice Court. And 5 DUIs. Those are important things, in my opinion. Not all this, not most of what you've been talking about tonight. How could I get you to pay attention to what I think is important, and a lot of other people think, instead of worrying about parking or somebody's convenience walking across some street in Brooks?
Good. Thank you, Bob.
What do you think of these victims of violent offenders and sex offenders? What do you think those victims, you think they're convenienced? Thank you.
Bob, thank you very much. That's a good question, Jordan, because, it can be argued that cities historically especially would deal with, police, fire. That's how cities were formed in the first place.
Yeah.
What about Bob's question? That's a good point about, the speeding in particular. You talk about Brooks. Whoosh. What about those fundamental services, especially law and fire and those kinds of things?
Well, police and fire are our 2 biggest departments. Police is a $20 million plus department. And we are, so first of all, we do have police needs. We have space needs. We recently built a new facility for evidence. When I started on the city council, our evidence facility was in the basement of City Hall, and it was completely untenable. It was there was evidence stacked to the ceiling, and it was and a lot of that evidence is has drugs on it, or is not really something that should just be sitting on a shelf where people are working in close proximity to it. So a few years ago, through the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, we were able to build a new police evidence facility, and that houses our evidence. It also consolidates some operations. So police used to report to a small building up on Scott Street for their shift start. Now they go to this new facility on Catlin, which is more central, and it provides, fire department a call for service comes from the fire department to the call typically. Police department, it's usually the patrol car is in the community, and so the call for service might come from a more an area within the community wherever the car might happen to be, the officer might happen to be at the time. But having that proximity to be able to go back and forth to the facility for administrative functions is really important. So this facility now has detectives, evidence, and it's the location where patrol cars are stored and where people report, where officers report to duty. One of the things we need to do is, as we look at moving into the federal building, we have a police operation within the federal building. And we're doing a master planning process right now with the police department to determine what the space needs are and figure out where police's home should be for the rest of their operations. And frankly, Midtown makes a lot of sense. It's close. I think it's important to continue to have a police presence downtown, but as far as the main operation, the Midtown area makes a lot of sense for its proximity really to the whole community. So there's work going on to ensure that police has the facilities they need. There's also, as you mentioned, we added some officers a few years ago, and that continuing to keep making sure that our ratio of officers to community size and to call for service volume is important. Touching on other emergency services, we're in a similar position with fire. We're going to need a sixth fire station in the community in very short order. As we're growing to the west, Fire Station 4, which is kind of out behind Murdoch's and Costco in that area, that's where one of our ladder trucks lives for larger structure fires, and it's also the area that serves the area to the west, the Setupkin area and the area out to beyond Pleasant View. That area is going to be increasingly strained as there's more development, and we really need to get out ahead of planning for.
Plus the Mullen situation. I mean, one thing I've thought about is, you talk about the Mullen build project and all that. Anytime you start moving out, that's that spread of infrastructure you were talking about earlier. That's the challenge.
Yeah. So. The last, I guess, there's two other components, and one of them is our mobile support unit. That mobile support team is an evidence-based, really innovative new city service, which is operated out of our fire department, and it is really a first responder that is attached to a social worker who goes out and provides assistance to members of our community who are in crisis, who don't necessarily need a police response. Or actually, a police response might actually be counterproductive, but it provides services to people who are experiencing crisis within the community. The crisis. That program and a variety of others are on the ballot this November through through the county's crisis intervention levy, and the Crime Victim Advocate program that provides services to victims of violent crimes is included in that. And so I think getting that levy adopted would go a long way to shoring up those services and making sure that programs like the Crime Victim Advocate program are fully funded moving forward.
Thank you. We will be talking in more depth about a lot of issues. I'm sure law and justice will be one of those, because as you talk about growth, it is one of the real pinch points when it comes to growth and development. I've seen this in other states, in other areas in the West especially, where you talked about that larger suburban lot development, and before you know it, I think out in my neighborhood, Miller Creek, a perfect example. That fire station used to be out there all by itself. It's a little hard now. The response times get more difficult with more traffic, that sort of thing. But I'm sure we'll talk about taxes. I think that's probably a topic for another time, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of those other things. I'm sure the Missoula redevelopment agencies, especially, would be nice to kind of talk into those. So, how can people reach out to you, Jordan, and I should say Mayor Hess? How can they reach out to you and with the questions or those kinds of things? What's sort of that communication level that you'd like to foster in the coming months?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in a normal situation, the voters would have the opportunity to get to know a candidate over months, and then probably too many months for most voters. But I have been elected in Ward 2, but I really intend to be accessible to voters who haven't had the chance to get to know me through a traditional campaign process. So always feel free to reach out. I fully intend to continue Mayor Engen's tradition of welcoming. I welcome meetings on topics of interest. City email addresses are kind of clunky to give out orally, but my email is mayor@ci.missoula.mt.us, and that is also on a business card in the corner, so you don't have to remember it. But I welcome people to get in touch, and I really my goal is to be accessible and to be communicative, and forums like this I think are a good opportunity, and I welcome any suggestions on how to engage.
I have to ask this because I'm a journalist, and you mentioned that, but I've heard people talk about that, is will Jordan Hess be running in a year from now? I'm sure that's way down the road for you, that kind of decision, but what can you tell folks if they're wondering about where Mayor Hess is going to go?
I don't know is my honest answer. I want to just get immersed in I'm learning so much so quickly. I will make a decision pretty soon because I will need to, but I don't know right now.
Okay, good. Appreciate that honest answer. But that's what everybody's asking me, and I said, I'm going to be talking to the man. I'll have to see where he's at. So we appreciate that. Again, want to thank everybody for being a part of this. Thanks to our MCAT staff. Oh, one more question. I think we have a little time. Let's get one more question here. So. Yeah, no, go ahead and stand up. Sure.
Yeah. So my name is Birgit Graf. I live here also. Oh, my English isn't very good.
That's okay.
So I moved here 10 months ago, and I also wanted to end on a positive note. I love it here. I feel very good about so many things. Like the public transportation is amazing to me. I'm very grateful that it got expanded. And I'm a bicyclist because of the trails. When I first moved here, I live in a neighborhood that's very easy you go by the river and you have all these trails. I didn't know if I'm safe in the beginning, and I'm sorry, I'm nervous, so my voice is cracking.
You're doing fine.
So I was very careful in certain neighborhoods, and I feel very safe, honestly. And so I really appreciate that. Not having to pay for the bus is also very nice, I think. And so I'm hoping that many more people will use the bus system. And what did I want to say? So in the summertime, I had, of course, a problem with the heat and then with the smoke. So I got very worried about the future. And so I was wondering if the city of Missoula is considering endorsing the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty in the future sometime. And that's what I'm just wondering. But I also want to say, I feel the community is giving me a lot. People are very active here. And I've lived in other places where I felt people have kind of given up and are just have resigned. And you can feel it, and here it's more a positive feel. So I would like to give back to the community, honestly, because it's this back and forth, right? So I just want to thank you that you're here, and
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I'm glad you found Missoula as a home, and we welcome you to enjoy your time here very much. Somebody get her number, because I know we have a lot of citizen committees and panels and things like that, so I'm sure somebody will be talking to you before you. She mentioned one thing that I think we'll leave on maybe for a future topic, because you do have this background in transportation and infrastructure, and that might be a good one, and may want to get somebody from Mountain Line in particular. You must be excited, though, to get back to our original point, to see these buses rolling and to see that expansion of service and those things, because I know from your position at UM, you were always just a huge advocate of that, and it must be exciting to see that type of reaction from people like her.
It is, and thank you for coming, and welcome to Missoula. And it's been really rewarding to see Mountain Line grow and to see they've had so much success in getting federal grants, and I have been really excited about what they've been able to do. And the Sunday service launched this July, and I think that really is a game changer for people go places on Sunday, and so in order to have one thing, if a bus comes once an hour. You could think of it like your garage door only opening once an hour. Or you're always either 5 minutes late or 55 minutes early. That's what happens when a bus runs once an hour. And so I think having this frequent weekday service and having the Sunday service and the later evening service is really going to be impactful for a lot of people. It's available. It's not. I think it's a part of our housing solution. So maybe a 2-car household is comfortable becoming a 1-car household because they have the ability to share a car and use the bus or something like that. And it's one of those. Transit is it's additive. So if you add a bunch more cars to a roadway, it degrades the user experience. If you add more people to a bus, you get another bus, and you improve the user experience. So it's additive. Where the more people use it, the better it gets. And
certainly appreciated by families with young people that we may not want to have on the roads anyway. So that's good. Yes. Oh yes. That's okay.
Hi. Knowing your background in transportation, what do you see as the future of infrastructure for electric vehicles and electric transportation? Because I know between here and Flathead, we're woefully short. And, do you see that infrastructure being built up quickly?
Yeah.
What about that? Thank you, Scott. Yeah, what about that? That's an interesting question because I know the state has gone through and done some studies and things, but you do kind of wonder if you're in the market for an electric car, will the chargers be there?
Yeah. So the State Department of Environmental Quality has worked on deploying. First of all, it was the Volkswagen settlement money from the Volkswagen diesel emissions scandal, and now more recently from the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And there's significant resources for adding electric vehicle charging stations. DEQ has gone through a process where they've identified some corridors in Montana that are EV corridors, and they're focusing on deploying chargers in those locations. One of the things that the city provided feedback on early in that process was, there's a charger, the Electrify America charger out of Walmart. We want people coming into town, we want them going downtown. We want them being able to go and experience our downtown have a cup of coffee or go to a bookstore or something like that while their vehicle is charging. And so I think just being really deliberate about where those stations go and where that federal money is directed is going to be very important. And I think, going back to the question about our climate goals, I think making sure that we're providing meaningful utility backbone, and that's not a city function, but that's a utility and a state function. But making sure that we're providing meaningful capacity for EV charging. The city's been working with Northwestern Energy on what's called a renewable rate option, or basically building new renewable capacity within the state of Montana. And I think it goes together really well with adding EV capacity to make sure that that power is coming from a clean source. And
Missoula Electric Co-op too has been doing a lot. They recently had about a week ago, I think. Had an event too where they were talking about more of those kinds of things. To answer her question too, we should point out about the city's pledge of, what do I want to say, 3 years ago now, I suppose. I have to think, is it before COVID or after COVID, where we talked about having the standard, was it zero emission, low emission? What was the program? You know the one I'm talking about. We made that climate pledge. I'll have to look up the answer.
So we have a 100% clean electricity.
There you go. That's what I'm thinking.
And that's a city-county joint resolution that by 2030, 100% we'll have 100% clean electricity in the city and county. Working with the utility is a key part of that, and I think the city and the county and the city of Bozeman have been very much jointly engaged in that effort. But it's a tall order, but. And 2030 is coming quickly, but it's important work.
Yeah. Well, Mayor Hess, we appreciate your time very much. Thank you to all of you. Yeah, give him a little round of applause. It's his first time. It can be a challenge to sit here and especially answer some of my strange questions from time to time. We appreciate your time. Thank you for serving. Mayor Hess. We appreciate it very much, and sort of coming in and helping us. And thanks to Mike Nugent and Gwen Jones for your service on the council and helping put everybody in place and get us back into motion and into gear. I think John would be happy with seeing momentum and seeing us here. Our next program will be October 26th, so we invite you to join us. You can come down. We're in the 4th floor of the library. Another thank you to our friends at the Missoula Public Library for having us in this wonderful space, and we appreciate that very much. So thank you for being here with us, and thanks to them for having us, and NCAT. And put October 26th, and we'd love to have you join us in person or be able to call in your calls. So thank you very much for joining us, and on Wednesdays with the Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.